Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Andrew Chi, a research fellow with the Conflict Security and Development Program here at the IISS. Let me welcome you all this afternoon to our second Africa sessions, which aims to hear from an important voice from the African continent, drawn from the world of politics, business and academia. The sessions are designed to offer a new perspective on Africa's geopolitical and geoeconomic situation and to examine Africa's international place in international security. Today's Africa session will focus on Kenya. Kenya's position as a member of IGAD and its significant involvement in peacekeeping missions in both Somalia and South Sudan demonstrate its central security role in the region. Understanding Kenya's approach to these issues is therefore crucial to creating stability in the Horn and in East Africa. Despite Kenya's growing influence, the country remains vulnerable to an array of regional security challenges. For example, the continued threat from Al-Shabaab and instability in Somalia. While Kenya has sought to mitigate this through its involvement in AMISOM, this still poses a real threat to Kenya. The country is also wrapped in a maritime dispute with Somalia. Coupled with this is the threat of piracy in the region. Finally, concerns have been raised about Kenya's total loans, which have reached, according to new estimates, 6 trillion Kenyan shillings. I'm delighted to have with us this afternoon His Excellency Kenyan High Commissioner Manoah Esipisu, who will address how Kenya is tackling many of these issues. His Excellency was appointed as the Ambassador of the Republic of Kenya in London in November 2018. He leads a team dedicated to strengthening bilateral relations around the key pillars of security and defense, trade, investment and diaspora, tourism and education. Before joining his current position, His Excellency spent 5 years as President Kenyatta's key communication advisor in the role of Secretary of Communications and State House spokesperson from 2013. He served as Special Assistant to the President of the African Development Bank, responsible for public affairs and stakeholder relations, and has travelled to over 80 countries. His Excellency first came to London as a diplomat in 2006 and worked at the Commonwealth Secretariat, where he was spokesperson and Deputy Director of Communications and Public Affairs. There, he was responsible for and worked closely with presidents and prime ministers to deliver on all communication aspects for the Commonwealth heads of government meetings in Uganda, Trinidad and Tobago and Australia, and where I had the privilege of working under his leadership. Today's event will be on the record, so without further waiting, I'll hand the floor over to His Excellency, and then I'll open the floor for the Q&A session.
Good afternoon. Even though, as a journalist, I wanted every discussion on the record, as a diplomat, I sometimes shiver at the idea that everything should be on the record. So thank you again for joining us today. It's a pleasure to speak to such a keen and engaged audience on a matter we consider to be of extreme importance. Let me also say that this is a fine time for this conversation. The Horn of Africa, for all the challenges to our security that our region endures, is also blessed to have leaders who fight continuously for peace and stability. The Nobel Prize to the deserving Prime Minister of Ethiopia reflects his growing achievements as a courageous mediator and is embedded in the region's hopes to become stable, to be secure and to be prosperous. The new chapter that Sudan has turned, in addition to the developments between Ethiopia and Eritrea, added to our collective resolve as reflected in AMISOM, are testament to a powerful regional desire for peace and security. That we are all able to do so much of this crucial work, collaborating, actively evokes President Kenyatta's strong and often stated conviction that we rise together, or in fact don't rise at all. There is lots of good news to celebrate, but also immense challenges that need to be overcome through coordinated responses regionally and with our global partners such as the United Kingdom. Many states in our region are fragile, fraught with internal conflicts that produces scores of internally displaced persons, reverse economic progress, and create fertile ground for extremism and terrorist group recruitment and operations. Of these multiple threats, jihadist terrorism is perhaps the most serious of the security challenges we face in our region, because it actively seeks the dismemberment of states and the regional and global order. The success of Al-Qaeda and ISIS groups in destroying states in the Middle East and parts of the Sahel and North Africa is a testament that this is a threat with extreme seriousness. Let me talk a little to some history and potential future as we see terrorism. The foremost terrorist threats to the region are from Al-Shabaab and from ISIS affiliates and splinter groups operating in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Mozambique, in Nigeria, and in Somalia. Al-Shabaab is still working to recruit Kenyans and other East Africans for training and deployment in operations in Somalia and in the region. Islamic State fighters from Syria, Iraq, and Libya are still making their way south into the continent as well. The aim of Al-Shabaab is simply to take over the governance and, if possible, the regional and national governments of Somalia. Its project is irredentist, and no country that borders Somalia can expect its boundaries to remain as they are if Al-Shabaab achieves its aim. These territorial claims, which have occasioned interstate conflict in the past, these territorial claims have occasioned interstate conflict in the past, and were Al-Shabaab to win the power it seeks, politically or militarily, we can expect a repeat or worse. The military success of Al-Shabaab is far from assured. National and regional militaries backed by AMISOM and global partners such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and others have dealt it repeated defeats on the battlefield, and we can look forward to more of this treatment. But its political and ideological assault reach wider than its military capability. If it aligns with other political and ideological interests, particularly the expansionist or irredentist kinds, we will find ourselves dealing with a longer-term crisis that includes economic failure in Somalia and in areas exposed to the group's operatives. It would also frustrate Somalia's still vulnerable state-building project and probably allow global terrorism to retain a recruitment and training platform in that country. The simple fact is that if East Africa is going to be the long-term hub for rising levels of investment, economic production, and profits, then we will need to minimize or eliminate the threats of groups such as Al-Shabaab, whose existence is a direct threat to such a positive outcome. I have to ask them, what are the things that we have to do to deal with this? The first thing we must do is to deny the group the ability to hold territory. Doing so allows it to exploit learning, correctional, religious, business, and charitable institutions to fund its continuous existence and terrorist operations. Its holding of ground legitimizes its narrative of victory over states and international community, feeding into the recruitment drive and therefore the production of more bombers and shooters. This means the military means must be maintained and escalated, but it is admittedly also not sufficient. Regional and international partners must come together with the federal and regional governments of Somalia to design and implement a framework for combating Al-Shabaab's financing using strong joint military teams linked to effective prosecution and incarceration in Somalia itself. These teams must also take aim at its illicit taxation and protection rackets of thousands of businesses and many of the humanitarian organizations present in Somalia at this time. A big part of this requires that civilians and international humanitarian operations be much better protected by Somali regional and federal forces. It is also important that all countries exposed to this threat to domesticate and be in compliance with the binding counterterrorism measures in the UN Security Council resolutions 2178 on foreign fighters and others on combating the financing and form of support and any form of support to terrorist groups. Rather than focus so exclusively on countering terrorism financing measures in the formal banking and money transfer systems, we will also need to fully deal with cash-based financing in areas that terrorists operate. While humanitarian actors such as DFID and USID have relatively strong accountability systems, we will need the entire sector to be more transparent and supported in minimizing taxation by terrorist groups. To not do this and to invite the terrorist groups to take headline-grabbing attacks will eventually lead to the humanitarian sector being publicly accused of being a source of terrorism. Humanitarianism will suffer as a result because at the end of the day, it depends on political support, which itself is deeply subject to public opinion. We will also have to invest more in preventive measures that include secure disengagement and reintegration programs for former operatives that want another chance, detecting and attacking sources of radicalization, and more effective investigations and prosecution of recruiters. Global digital communication platforms also, particularly social media and messaging applications such as WhatsApp, will need to be far more responsive to quickly detecting and quickly taking down terrorist extremist content as well. It is as urgent as ever to do more to close off religious spaces to militant extremists and their ideology. Countries that sponsor various forms of extremist interpretation of religion or identity beyond their borders will also need to be reined in. Countries need to build their abilities to safely deal with foreign terrorist fighters returning to their countries of origin after they have engaged in their hostilities. Regionally, we will also need to harden the regulation of private sector security standards and capabilities against terrorist organizations. As always, we need to work together to find what's more effective and to learn from each other's experience and to make the most of information that we already hold. The strong global consensus against terrorist activity after 9/11 in the US and 7/7 here in London, ladies and gentlemen, is fraying at the very moment terrorist groups are entrenching themselves in different parts of the world. And definitely in East Africa in particular. I think that the inability to completely defeat major terrorist groups, despite years of immense efforts and the urgent political crisis in the West, plus regional geopolitical competition, are responsible for a lot of us taking the eye off the red ball. We have to continue showing that this global fight is far from over, and that stepping down from it will compromise all our aspirations as countries and as a global community. Let me warn that there will be no end to major forced migration and massive internal displacement, provided global terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS can support or inspire strong local affiliates. State sponsors of terrorism will also continue having potent tools to threaten international peace and security, trade, and the stability of oil and commodity markets if they can still find clients to sponsor. If I may briefly comment on political platforms for regional stability, I'd have to say that at the end of the day, the tools for counter-terrorism and security must be joined by better governance, strong social and political cohesion, and inclusive economic growth if we are to build a lasting stability in our region and really throughout the world. I believe that the critical starting point is in building real bipartisan accord so that it can generate the trust that President Kenyatta in September told his fellow leaders at the United Nations, and I quote him, "A scarcer commodity worldwide, and with it loss, social and political division along ethnic, racial, religious lines that have been growing destructive consequences." Kenya has led by example in this. We are building bipartisan accord between those in government and the political opposition after a very fractious electoral season. I refer to 2017 when we held a presidential election, which was annulled by the Supreme Court, and we had to hold a second election. We have a Building Bridges initiative that is a bold homegrown approach to strengthen our unity. And looking at the rest of the world, I believe this is the direction we should all be taking. Building bridges to overcome political cleavages and growing extremism will allow us to limit the space that violent extremists exploit to drive their messages, radicalizing our citizens and justifying terrorist violence. In Kenya, we believe that this is a necessary foundation on which to build successful counter-terrorism and national security. Ladies and gentlemen, let me close by saying that this sounds like a lot needs to be done. But all it really requires is that we share a common diagnosis of the threats to East Africa's stability and security that allows us to build common efforts. We are equal to the task in Kenya, and we are ready to work with our partners to achieve uplift for a region that can be a new driver of global progress and opportunity. Thank you. I think maybe just to mention this one, because Andrew mentioned it, concerns about our debt. I think we are at about 50% of GDP, the debt to GDP. No one mentions that Japan is 233%, or that any of the developed countries are above 100%. I think the thing that is important to us is that you have the ability to invest the money you borrow in the projects for which it is borrowed, and that you do not borrow so that you feed your recurrent expenditure. To the extent that you borrow to finance things that are necessary to grow your country, this is an imperative, and I think that the concerns at this point to us are misplaced. I think it's good to always tell people to be more careful and to work so that they do not get their plans derailed. But I think that we stand quite comfortable in what we plan to achieve, and we are investing in the areas for which money is being borrowed. Thank you.
So I would like to open the floor for some questions. If you could start by mentioning who you are and your affiliation.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. The name's Ewan Grant. I'm a former law enforcement intelligence analyst who's worked in international law enforcement and development programs, including early last year, in an absolute shambles of a World Bank project in Puntland. That is a criticism of Puntland and the World Bank. It is not a criticism of the Puntland administration or of Kenya. My question is about joining things up and working together. Do you see any signs that Western nation states and the international organizations are improving their coordination of security assistance with developmental, because I seem to find that generally this is rather poorly done. I once met, I think it was the great nephew of Bruce Mackenzie, and I can't help wonder that the European countries badly need a Bruce Mackenzie to speak to all the countries of Greater East Africa, particularly Kenya, to say how can we join things up to work with you. I don't think we're doing that very well from the European side. Thank you.
Take that question.
I could take another two.
Yes, I have a question. You spoke about Kenya's regional response and really touching there about the sort of militarized approach or counterterrorism, and I wonder whether or not lessons are being learned or could be learned from the Sahel, where we see that has impacted particularly the local dynamics, and whether counterterrorism approaches are the best solution for Somalia.
Yeah.
Thank you for the speech, Your Excellency. My question concerns the East African community. So far it hasn't been exactly a sparkling success story. How do you see it in the next 10 years?
Thanks very much. I think in respect to better coordination in terms of our approaches, especially on security, I'd say that first, we can always say there is more that needs to be done, because there is always more that needs to be done. However, I can also say that the coordination has really sharply increased, has been on the rise since 2013, when President Kenyatta came into office. You will remember soon after that we had the Westgate attacks, and for 4 days this was raging, partly because no one really knew what was going on in there in terms of how many people were we dealing with. Their intelligence had been available, but it wasn't properly coordinated. But if you fast forward to the Dusit attacks of last year, better coordination in terms of response, better information sharing, and faster dealing with the actual threat. In between that, there have been dozens of attacks that have been sniffed out because we were getting intelligence on time, and that intelligence was being acted on. So I would say coordination between specifically Kenya and the West has really significantly improved in terms of where it's placed in intelligence. I think that when you deal with Somalia, you've got to use a multiplicity of approaches. So you've got to do your counter-terrorism work, but you also have to work to educate people. So knowledge sharing, awareness, taking care of youth that might be lured into terror groups, being able to work to grow the economy so you can provide jobs and reduce the lure for these activities, because in countries such as ours, that is cited as a major reason why recruitment happens, because there's hundreds of youth that are idle and who can be swayed from one place to another. And I think that we're working hard at making sure that these are the type of things we do to deal with minimizing the ability for terror groups to recruit. I think in terms of the East African community, I think that all of us agree that we have our challenges. We definitely can be better coordinated in terms of our approach to delivering the aspirations of the community. One of the biggest problems we have, of course, is that Kenya, for instance, is a middle-income country surrounded by LDCs, which means that you are dealing with your main partners is at different levels. So the LDCs, for instance, can export everything to the EU under anything but arms. We can't do that because we are at another level of development. So it comes down to what is it that the leaders can agree to progress, and I think we continue to work on that project. If we look at what we have been able to achieve in East Africa, other parts of Africa are struggling at present to come to terms with that. For instance, working in a Kenyan can work in Rwanda or in Uganda without a work permit, for instance. Travel within East Africa is by ID card, not a passport, for instance. So there's things we are doing that I think other people haven't done yet. And in the region we have a single area network for telecoms, for instance. So all phone calls within East Africa are considered local calls. We are making some steps. We need to we need to jump. We are not yet there, but I think we are moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Your Excellency. A real privilege to hear from you today. My name's Hayley. I work for an NGO called Crisis Action, and we do a lot of work on conflict resolution, working with a network of global NGOs and civil society. I think you spoke powerfully about the range of different techniques and approaches that need to be taken to tackle terrorism, including looking at tackling some of the drivers. Do you think there's an opportunity for Kenya to be playing more of a role in the region in tackling some of those drivers, so looking at issues like corruption, looking at conflict prevention and resolution in the region? And is there any advice that you would give to the UK or key asks that you'd make of the UK government to support and work better with Kenya in playing that leading role in the region?
Thank you. I'm Virginia Kumali from IISS. My question has to do with trade and economic opportunities, but also has some repercussions for security. So as we're sitting here in London, in Sochi, President Putin is hosting the first Russia-Africa summit. What do you expect to emerge out of the summit? What are your expectations for the continent and for Kenya in particular?
And then one more question, please.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. My name is Ade. I just finished my Masters at the Africa Leadership Centre up the road. You alluded to some of the strides that Kenya has made under President Kenyatta in dealing with terrorism. What are the leadership failures that you see in places like Nigeria that have been successes in Kenya that Nigeria can learn from in tackling things like Boko Haram and the so-called herdsman crises?
That's the part I might not want to be on the record. I think first, looking at our approach to dealing and resolving conflict. I think first we took ground that assumed things can make progress without actual work, and that doesn't work. So you've got to admit that first you have a problem, and second that you need to engage the stakeholders involved. And if, in fact, it is in an area where we cannot engage with stakeholders, because, for instance, we don't engage with terrorists, we have to take the necessary actions that are required to be taken. To do so effectively, you need to speak to your partners on a constant basis, so you know that all of you are acting on the same wavelength. You are reading the same hymnal. If you are acting independent of your neighbor and you don't share the information you have, that means that you'll be working at cross purposes. And what we have tried to do is to promote the information sharing, so that we know, for instance, which NGOs are in what place and what pressures are being exerted on them, so that we know who, for instance, is being forced to pay Al-Shabaab taxes or not, and then putting pressure on the world to do something to stop this type of extortion, which, in our view, is equivalent to funding terror. I think we continue to work with the UK on this. They know our views about listing Al-Shabaab as a terrorist group, in order that we do not fund this group that shoots Kenyans as part of it, just like a game, you know. If people understand that where you think it is necessary to support humanitarian work, all of us agree it's necessary to support humanitarian work, but not if it feeds into the narrative that it is okay for other people to die because others must leave. I don't think that is something that we agree, and it's something that we have talked to the UK government about. If all of us are working in concert, if we are stopping finances reaching these destinations, it means that their capacity to fight will be diminished, and that we are more likely to succeed eventually than if we take an approach that gives with one hand while taking with the other. I think in terms of the trade and economic opportunity, and I think I'm laughing because of President Putin convening this Africa summit. The UK is convening one in January, by the way, and the goal, I think, is the same. You've got to try to get into an Africa that was initially forgotten or put on the sidelines, and in which China was allowed to take the front foot. Now, if you are in the driver's seat, and I see this in Formula One all the time, people don't brake just so you can overtake them. You're going to be imaginative, you're going to do some things that get you, first of all, to pull even, and then you might pull ahead. Yeah, but I think this is what this is about. You need to showcase what you are about. You need to show why you are interested and why now, and you need to show that you're going to be a true partner for development. China hasn't been welcome in Africa because they were giving the proverbial milk and honey from heaven. Not at all. I think they recognize that Africans have priorities, and they have worked hard to try to meet these priorities. And I mean, some of the methods have been astounding, to be honest, because in 1987, when I was leaving campus. No, I just entered campus. China built the Moi International Sports Center, a soccer stadium in Nairobi, 60,000 seater. They built it for free. Yeah. Now tell me, 20 years later, when I'm looking for a business person to work with, who am I likely to turn to? That one who has helped me already is just more likely to have a better say to have a better opportunity to be listened to than somebody who's been ignoring you for the same period. So it's really, you've got to come to the table, recognize that these investment priorities we are talking about for us in infrastructure, for instance, we are a small economy, for instance, in Kenya, but we have the leadership in financial inclusion globally. Our money transfer technology has been transformative across the world. But to get from Jomo Kenyatta International Airport to the city center in the morning, it's 35 kilometers. It can take you 2.5 hours. Having a chat about it will not fix it, right? So we need a highway built, an expressway built from the airport that can deal with that problem. And when you put the tender out, you then see, well, the first 10 companies on the queue are Chinese, right? So we need to be in a position where the Russian companies, the UK companies, the American companies are following these investment opportunities and also putting up their hands. Because the era where you got these things thrown at you is no longer with us. The governance that has long been preached by the West is in a position where it now is at the fore. So the West has to deal with it, yeah, because we can't kind of just give tenders. People have to openly tender for them, and then if you win, you've got your opportunity to progress. So I think everyone needs to showcase what they can do with the continent, not necessarily for the continent. We in Kenya don't quite believe that aid will fix our problems. We think that being competitive and being able to trade will fix the challenges we have, and being able to deal with partners who see us as partners and not who see us as some kind of insubordinate state that can be addressed in any manner that does not respond to our priorities. That's really where we are with this one. I think with Boko Haram, we've got to continue to draw on all intelligence sources available, and you've got to then have the conviction that based on the intelligence you have, you're going to take the actions that you need to take to deal with terror. Sometimes it takes a long time, but eventually I think if your mind is at the right place, it is something that you'll deal with. Plus, you've got to accept that the other people have an opinion, and that other opinion is not necessarily criticism. It just needs to be embraced and followed.
Dear, thank you so much for your comment. My name is Dia. I work at the IISS on Middle East and North Africa. You made quite a bit of reference to the more ideological drivers for extremism and terrorism within the region, and you mentioned, state propagation of certain ideologies. As someone who works in the Middle East, a lot of that emanates from Gulf states. My question is, to what extent do you, how do you see the combat of these ideologies on the part of East African nations, and how would that be most effective in tackling them?
High Commissioner, Tim Morris. I'm a former diplomat. I was 10 years in Africa, and my last posting was as an ambassador in South Sudan. You said a lot, and thank you very much, about a whole range of issues, and particularly and rightly concentrating on Al-Shabaab and the threat, and on investment as well, which business, which is a hugely important issue. If I could just go back to the region, I worked and had the honour to work with your colleagues and with a great degree of Kenyan leadership on the issue of South Sudan within IGAD. My question is how do you, if you look into the future, how do you see the region, the cooperation in the region developing? Because understandably there's an element, of course, observable element where the heads of state support each other and of course respect each other's sovereignty, but where IGAD and the region, and with Kenyan leadership too, are actually a force for conflict resolution. That's difficult, and it's difficult for all of us, and the tragedy of South Sudan it has its own particular aspects which is difficult to generalize about. But how do you see that developing? Do you see your government and your leadership taking a higher profile in IGAD? And how do you see IGAD itself as developing as a regional motor?
And the gentleman at the back.
So thank you for your comments. My name is James Gray. I work for a security company called Celis. We have been working in Kenya for the last 10 years or so. My question relates to British companies. At the moment, the UK government is encouraging British firms to look towards Africa, particularly as we seek to leave the European Union and look for new trading partners. What are the best areas do you think British companies can add value in Kenya, and what could be done to help them find those opportunities?
Well, thank you. I think the first question, we've got to do a little more in addition to dealing with the ideologies question. I think for us we support interfaith a dialogue in radicalization hot zones, for instance, because we think that different faiths bring different strengths and opportunities on the table to be able to help especially young people dealing with this problem. And we are also working to embed radicalization detection and a response in student safety in a security framework that has been rolled out in 300 schools throughout the country. The idea is that young people at high school level need need some idea of where we are in terms of the terrorist threat and how they need to deal with some of the stuff that they hear as time passes. We also are strengthening protective security for the private sector, and we have strengthened our border security regime with a multi-agency approach. So we have the military, we have police, we have your various security forces, but we also have religious leaders working in tandem with these people in order to deal with some of these problems related to radicalization. And we have trained disengagement officers throughout the country whose cases are linked to integration capabilities. So this has become an operational choice that we think has a lot of promise, and I think this has been also extended to our prisons in a big way, because prisons also had become an area where the spread of ideology is a big deal. I think IGAD has a place as our regional guarantor of peace. At the moment, IGAD is led by Ethiopia, and Ethiopia has consistently done a great job in leading peace initiatives in the region. We in Kenya have done our bit, usually beyond the call of duty. As I remember, the first time there was a coup in South Sudan. It was Christmas of 2013. I had just arrived in Zanzibar on holiday when I had a phone call back from State House saying, well, the president is back in the office. No pressure. We just wanted you to know. So I think Kenya has been taken as a just arbiter in regional operations, and we think that we will continue to play a role. But we think that IGAD has a place and must continue to particularly lead in efforts for South Sudan, for instance, where it has been for long the guarantor of the peace process. I think if IGAD has faced its challenges, no one can run away from that. But I think if you keep the focus and you know that you have a goal that you need to achieve, then really you strive hard to get this work done. And I can assure you, I think they've worked very hard on this project. Yeah, there are many times that I saw heads in negotiating rooms for 18 to 20 hours, and you still come out and there is no resolution. So I know how painful this has been in some instances. Because, well, when the heads were not sleeping, it meant we were not sleeping either, which is quite an issue. And I think it continues for them. Yeah. On the question of investments in Kenya, I would say if nothing focuses UK business, then the January summit should. There is already 220 UK companies in Kenya, so there is evidence of a track record of performance. I can guarantee you they are making lots of money. It's true. BAT are there, Diageo is there, Thomas Delarue is there. We have lots of fintechs there, and really the question is, what more can be done? First, there's lots of infrastructure projects that still need to be done, and I think this is about the time to look at our priority list, because it is available, it's in public, so it's not as if it has been given only to the Chinese. This priority list for Kenyan investment is out in the public. So infrastructure projects are there. The President's flagship Big Four agenda also includes manufacturing, right from textiles and apparels to leather. It includes healthcare. And if you imagine that the waiting list at our heart hospital is 1,000 people, then you can understand that there is space for investment there, because lots of these people don't get to hospital, right? They die on the queue, and we spend as much as $200 million a year in hospitals in India. Yeah, so there is space for specialized hospitals, for cancer, for heart, for cardiologist reasons, for bone marrow transplant. Pretty much every specialized thing would have patients, and they're willing to pay to stay alive. There is the housing, the housing program. It includes affordable housing. Just like when you build houses here, you've got to make a percentage available for affordable housing. We do the same. The president wants to build 500,000 homes in the next 3.5 years. The government can guarantee offtake, but you've got to guarantee the money and technology, because all of us understand that if you build it the way we build our homes in our villages, meaning brick and mortar must go, then you won't deliver them. And you guys definitely have the technology and the money, and we have the land and guarantee to clear processes as well as guarantee offtake. I don't think that you can get a better deal in housing than this one. And lastly, there's a question of food security. So we are a country of 45 million that is not food secure. So there is plenty of investment in the areas of processing, food processing, for instance, in the area of providing new breeds of seeds, for instance, in some areas, and being able to properly utilize the farmland available to support the country. So I think that in manufacturing, in food security, in housing, you've got sufficient spaces there for investment, and we believe that these are things that if we focus properly on the 20th of January, that is the date of the summit, then there are a number of things that you can bring on the table that are new areas of investment.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for the great insights provided on Kenya's approach to a multitude of security challenges. My name is Andre Kusaro, an intern at the Institute, and my question is regarding the ongoing civil war in South Sudan, and regarding Kenya's domestic and regional approaches to tackling the instability caused from the situation, and your thoughts on how a ceasefire can be achieved. Nick.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. My name is Nick Crawford, and I'm a research associate here at IISS. I thought your response on the level of debt in Kenya was interesting, but of course the question is not simply one of a debt to GDP ratio, where Japan is obviously far higher, but of the affordability of the debt repayments. But that aside, I wanted to ask you a question about some of the infrastructure projects that are the Kenyan government's priorities. One of them, I assume, was the continuation of the third phase of the railway from Mombasa to Nairobi and onwards. And I know that China has paused, at least, its lending for that for the third phase over some concerns about the economic viability of the infrastructure project. And so I wondered, with respect to the priorities that the Kenyan government has, what assessments does the Kenyan government itself undertake as to the economic viability of its priorities? Or is there an assumption that the responsibility for assessing the feasibility really lies with those who may or may not want to engage with the Kenyan government, whether that's Chinese contractors, UK contractors, or any others?
And Nina, last question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your interesting talk. My name is Nina. I'm here at IISS as well. My question concerns the maritime border dispute with Somalia. As we've seen over the past few months, Kenya has tried quite hard to have Somalia drop the case at the ICJ. There have been quite some political tensions back and forth. And I wonder if you could elaborate perhaps a bit on how this might potentially affect Kenya-Somalia relationships, and especially with regards to security at the direct border between Kenya and Somalia, but as well how it affects Kenya's relationship with the broader region, as for example the Arab League has also supported taking Somalia's side in this dispute.
I think, Andrew, if we start with your question. Not yours. Yeah. No, that's a wrong name, sorry. Yeah. Andrew, yeah.
It's a European name.
Yeah, Ish. It has to be the African mind, it can't differentiate. Yeah. I think the first thing is that, we have reached so many ceasefires in South Sudan, and that at the end of every new ceasefire, we hope that the one that we have reached will hold, and pray that it does, because no effort has been spared. The people who have to deal with the effects of this civil war are ourselves, in Kenya, in Uganda, in Ethiopia, and that partly explains why we are at the forefront of working tirelessly to see that whatever it is that needs to be done is done, to ensure that the current ceasefire holds, and that we can make greater strides towards peace. Whether it holds or not is really dependent on the two main actors in this conflict, the president and the deputy president. We continue to implore them to do what is necessary and to put their people first, because it comes down to putting your people first. And if you don't put your people first, then you will continue to bleed in this way. Our president talks to these people quite regularly, because he is convicted that he's got to continue to press them to see that there is need to end conflict. And as I said, we continue to work hard at this. After the last ceasefire, you know that the two gentlemen went to see the Pope. So we do whatever we can, and hopefully that in the end this will work. I think with our China engagement, the decision to stop the rail at Naivasha really wasn't China's; it's ours. Until we can see a justifiable case as to why the rail can go to Malaba, which is a border with Uganda, then we can't fund that bit, because economically it would not work for us. The reason it reached Naivasha is that Naivasha is going to be the home for the new special economic zone, where textiles and similar stuff exported to the United States under the African Growth Opportunity Act, as well as the new markets offered to us after years of discussion with China can be made. So we do think that we are investing in the right projects. We think that our neighbors cannot come and do due diligence for us. I mean, who buys a cup of tea and then asks to drink coffee? It just doesn't happen. You drink what you get. And we are committed to doing what we can for our country, and we are doing so. I think that if you ask any of these people who've been to my country and have enjoyed the 2.5 to 3 hour stay to cover 30 kilometers of road from Jomo Kenyatta Airport to the city center, they'll tell you that the Kenyans know what the heck they're doing, because there isn't a bridge to these things. I think people can complain about what it takes to invest in these things, but the people who have invested over time never quite understand how they invested. They think these things were automatically built. It cost the sweat of other people to do so. Others will need to exert the same sweat to get where you are, and you might feel pity for them, but I think they understand that the pain has to happen before the progress and prosperity is delivered at the doorsteps. These things don't happen like manna from heaven. There's got to be actual investment. And we in Kenya recognize this and have to do whatever we have to do for our country. I think the last question, Nina, I got that right? Yeah, I got that right. Is about the maritime dispute. We have always held that we don't choose our neighbors. They are there. However much Somalia likes, it can't run away from us. However much we like, we can't run away from them. We have to solve our problems. And to solve our problems in a candid way that will benefit the people of the two countries. Now, some people think that the court might decide this matter, and it may well decide. And then I think the court has to consider many things, including how it would enforce its decision. Those are questions that are out there. Also, we ask the simple question, where on earth do you go to the highest court to resolve a dispute? Don't you usually start in the lowest courts and you go through the motion, so to speak, so that you get rid of every available opportunity to resolve the conflict before you go to a court of last resort. So the fact that we are discussing a decision at a court of last resort, for us is common sense. That's why we ask, hey, how did you get here? Because the regional mechanisms that are available to discuss this matter have not been exhausted. The case has not been discussed elsewhere. It's come from zero to the International Court of Justice, a court that I might add its chair has a Somali president. So you can see we have reason to continue to ask that in fact this matter must be mediated outside of where it is, because the forum isn't the right one to start with. Will this continue to build tensions? I mean, we have troops in Somalia keeping the people of Somalia safe. And it's our responsibility to do so. If we didn't think so, we might have other ideas. But those ideas would hurt the people of Somalia. So we continue to take our obligations in the region seriously. Do we really worry about what other people are saying? We haven't seen the Arab League issue a statement, for instance. We had some organization claiming to be members of the Arab League issued a statement. They have no locus standi anywhere. No one knows these people as an organization of MPs of the Arab League. The Arab League is represented by heads of government or heads of state, and I haven't heard anything from them. So I'd say no reason for us to worry about any tensions with our partners, because there has been, at this point, no reason for it. As to how this matter will be resolved, I think we continue to make the basic case that cases are not resolved from the highest point; they have to be mediated. But that should that be necessary, we have always also made the position clear about how we have to proceed.
Yvonne is looking at me, so I know you have to dash. So this brings us to the end of this discussion. Please, can you join me in thanking His Excellency for being here today and for your engaging questions as well.